Hi, and welcome to the Spooky Hours. My name's David Saunderson, and today we're joined by Kate Cherrell from burialsandbeyond.com. How are you, Kate?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
Good, thank you. It's been a long time since we've spoke to each other. I was just checking when I was calling you on Skype, which is what we use to talk to people here on Spooky Hours, and it said the last time we spoke was on the 5th of June last year. That's a very long time ago.
Yeah.
But at least we're both still here, so that's throughout all the lockdown and everything. One of the things I was wanting to talk to you about, because I'm a big fan of burialsandbeyond.com. It's got lots of spooky stuff on it. You obviously write for us, but you also do your own thing. You talk a lot about Victorian seances, and I'm really quite intrigued with seances in general, but especially Victorian ones. What was it about the Victorian times that were so spooky that they wanted to talk to the dead?
Well, there's not really the spooky aspect at the heart of it. I think a lot of the spookiness that we see now has kind of been retroactively sort of added. But yeah, in the 19th century, if you think about it in a wider context, you have all of these amazing developments. You've got, social, political, industrial developments. And so at the time, from one level, a lot of people genuinely believed that God was bestowing these amazing blessings, these developments on the century. And so when the spiritualist movement began in the mid-19th century, it made sense to a lot of people that, okay, well, we can, after the telegraph, and all of these amazing medical things that are going on, why shouldn't we be able to have a phone line between us and the dead, or, us and God and all his angels, as it was then in far less secular times? So yeah, it was just the right place, the right time. And then when spiritualism and spiritual contact came forth, it just developed so quickly from its roots in modern spiritualism, from its roots in New York, and yeah, just spread like wildfire. And so there was the element of being able to talk to the dead, but there was a big performance aspect and a real fun aspect that we don't have so much today in like contemporary seance and contemporary investigation. It's a lot more simplistic today. People don't expect, big raising the dead type stuff. Whereas in the 19th century, if you wanted to see the dead wander around the room, share a cup of tea with them, if you went to the right medium, it could happen.
So you're saying that it was really, it was something quite natural back then, they felt. It was as natural as getting on the phone and talking to someone.
Well, exciting, still exciting and new, and the movement was very much finding its feet with what people would claim, should we say, what people can get away with. But it was new and it was exciting, but people went in for it from all walks of life. Fully. It was something that crossed social boundaries, class boundaries. Everyone, more or less, had some interaction with it.
So what I see is, when you see on movies and you see on TV shows quite extravagant women that would come in and be the the medium, or I don't know what the word is, but I suppose medium is the word for it, and they'd be the conduit from this world to the next, and that was real, wasn't it? They were quite characters, some of these people performing the seances.
Yeah. I mean, for every, your common or garden medium, shall we say, would maybe just rent a little room, do a bit of table tipping, things like that, a few little messages. But yeah, for every 10 mediums that were renting a small room and doing their work, there were superstars of spiritualism. And there's a lot of them were women, a lot of them were very, very dramatic and well-dressed and undressed in equal measure.
Okay, all right. Well, we have to get back to that bit. Can you maybe tell us a bit about it? You've given me a list of people that you want to talk about today, because they're your favourites. We're going to go through it, and you're going to tell us about them. So the first one is a person called Eva C. Tell us about Eva.
Yeah, well, I think everyone should have a personal list of favourite Victorian mediums. But yeah, Eva ties in quite well to the dressed and undressed remark, really. Eva isn't technically a Victorian medium, but I include her because I can. Okay. She conducted her first seances in 1905, but she reportedly gained spiritual abilities, mediumistic abilities, in 1904 following the death of her fiance. Now, Eva was a manifestation medium, so that means that if you went to her séances, you wouldn't just get messages, you'd see things, and see quite questionable things. And for most of these mediums, it's thanks to photography that we can really appreciate the effort that went into such séances. So Eva C, her real name's this pseudonym was Eva Carrière, but it has a French root, and my French abilities are non-existent. So let's say Eva C.
Eva C.
Yeah, she her spirit guide would come into séance rooms where she would have the gathered sitters, and her spirit guide was a 300-year-old Brahmin Hindu called Bien Boa. Again, might be taking liberties with pronunciation.
It's all right.
And the proof that this spirit guide entered the room and played a part in these séances is undisputed because we have the photographs. But Bien kind of took two different manifestation routes. So in one instance with Eva and Bien, he was quite clearly a cardboard cutout, which is brilliant. And in other instances, he was a man, but he was a man in a fake beard and a cloak, who turned out to actually be he's quoted as being an Arab coachman called Arexi, who they bribed to take part in these mediumship things. But yeah, the whole thing was incredibly Blue Peter. It was very arts and craftsy with her. So
you see quite a lot of that, don't you? You see that when they're supposedly doing the ectoplasm, it all seems to be like cotton wool when you see the photos and whatever it might be.
Yeah, Eva did a lot of ectoplasm. She was a big fan of ectoplasm. So when she produced certain clouds of ectoplasm, sometimes it would just look remarkably like cheesecloth. But in other instances, there's some brilliant photos of this ectoplasmic material coming out with little faces in them. Which
I'm sure we've probably seen it. We'll put the photos up after we've done this, so we know what you're talking about. Because a lot of this kind of stuff is quite famous, in much as when you're growing up and reading these kind of books, you see pictures of people sitting like this with a bit of cheesecloth coming out of their nose or something like that, with a couple of different, like what you'd class as sort of photos on your granny's, thing, that just sitting there going, well, there they are.
Yeah,
how anyone could possibly have ever been fooled by that, I don't quite understand. But I suppose that's the problem with this. You're dealing with people that are dealing with grief, so
not necessarily all the time. Some people just went for entertainment as well. But with some of Eva's photographs, she didn't get away with too much of it, because as much as she was very arts and craftsy, she did use a lot of popular magazines. So a lot of people that would appear as spirits were actually very, very alive celebrities.
Okay, so she's cut up the Radio Times, and she's got, what do you call,
exactly.
Phil from EastEnders has been. That's fantastic.
It would be. Yeah, it would be like the Mitchell brothers in ectoplasm. So
That's awesome.
She was. Yeah, I mean, Conan Doyle investigated her, thought she was legitimate. Houdini investigated her and went, maybe
so
not.
How long? So you said she supposedly got her psychic powers when her husband died in 1904. Started business in 1905. So how long did she go for with this? With her, I don't know, her entertainment.
Yeah, she went for quite a long time. I don't know exactly, but she definitely was investigated repeatedly across Europe. I think she went to several different countries. But she was very popular, and also because she did a lot of séances partially dressed and sometimes completely naked, that became incredibly sexualized. Okay. Let's put it there to keep it family friendly. It was extreme. But strangely enough, a lot of investigators wanted to go and see what Eva was up to. So she was in business for quite a long time.
I'm intrigued now, but as you say, this is a family program, but I'll have to maybe Wikipedia that after this. Now, the next person you talk to has a cool name as well, Mrs. Guppy. Now, that's an awesome name. Tell us about Mrs. Guppy.
I love Mrs. Guppy. I love her. She's firstly brilliant fun name, but also she's a fascinating woman, and one of those people who you can get really wrapped up in. But once you read more about them, you think, oh no, you are horrible. You're a horrible individual.
Okay.
She was quite unpleasant. But she was a very famous materialization medium. She was really like the star of the London scene for a while. And her big thing was apports, which are items that are manifested from the spirit world, from the ether, that are generally sort of deposited onto the seance table. So sort of like mid to late, let's say late 19th century, there was a trend, for example, with a lot of mediums bringing flower apports. So, as a sign that spirits had given them a gift, there'd be a few flowers on the table, which was, dramatic and beautiful and all the rest of it. But no, Mrs. Guppy, she would have flowers, but she would have enormous quantities of flowers, like straight from the flower market that were freshly cut. And she would have shrubs, trees with enormous clods of earth still attached, starfish, eels, lobsters. I think that was seafood week. Kittens, puppies.
Why? What was she doing? Just it was the show, is it?
It was the most extreme version of apports. So whatever someone did on a low level, Mrs. Guppy, many believe via the help of a trapdoor above the seance table, would produce those things, but in enormous quantities. And then in 1871, there was like an amazing seance that she was incredibly well known for, even though she wasn't really the medium in charge at the time. So there was a seance taking place at in the rooms of Hearn and Williams, who were very famous male mediums at the time. And they had a group of gathered sitters. This was at Lamb's Conduit Street in Bloomsbury. And they asked the spirit world for an apport. They asked them for a gift. And then they said, bring us something large. And then another sitter said, yeah, bring us Mrs. Guppy. And they said, oh, surely not. She's the biggest woman in London. And then reportedly, very soon afterwards, there was an enormous thud on the table and a few screams. And then when a match was struck and the room was lit again, on the middle of the table was Mrs. Guppy, who had been levitated and taken by spiritual hands all the way from Highbury, straight across to this seance table. And she was dressed just for relaxing at home. I think she had her shoes off, and she had her account book by her side, where she was still writing in it. And the last word she wrote was onions, which I think is such a lovely
gives me the vision, like that. When George Michael's singing "Don't Let the Sun Come Down on Me," and he's like singing, and then he goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Elton John." It's like bringing someone famous in. It's like, Mrs. Guppy, like, bah!
Yeah. Mrs. Guppy has entered the building via the ether.
Yeah, it's like when you bring a famous star in, and no one was expecting that for your thing, was it?
Exactly.
And it's like, boom.
Yeah, special guest.
It is. That's awesome. I've never heard that one before. So that's fantastic. So I don't know how you can even top that one, but you've got others though. You said you had a list. So Mrs. Guppy, who's so big that she actually gets brought in by other mediums as part of their deal. It's much better than a bit of a cheesecloth. So the next one you mentioned was Florence Cook. Tell me about her.
Florence Cook. These are all incredibly famous mediums. Florence Cook was probably the most famous young female medium of the 19th century. She was absolute superstar. And she was also kind of Mrs. Guppy's arch enemy, because Florence Cook was so kind of young and beautiful. Whenever you read reports of her, there's always comments on how she looks. And there was a few instances when Mrs. Guppy was plotting quite horrible attacks against Florence Cook to kind of.
So where was Florence Cook from? You had this Mrs. Guppy was obviously from London. You mentioned
they were. Well, she was Mrs. Guppy was born in a place called Horncastle in Lincolnshire, which is brilliant for antiques if anyone's interested.
Okay.
But she moved down to London. But Florence Cook as well was operating in London at the same time as Mrs. Guppy.
Okay, so
they were
competing London psychics for, and I imagine there must have been a fair bit of dough involved in all this when you're dealing with some quite fancy high class. Well, I say high class, but high society people.
Yeah, it's really finance and 19th century mediumship, especially with women, is so interesting, because if you get mediums that are just working in like a back room that have little business cards and things like that, they'll get paid in cash. But if you want the fame, if you want like the fame of mediumship, that's when you kind of do invitation only seances. Granted, invitations that may be gained through very expensive gifts, but there was a lot of instances of, this is so exclusive, we'll only have the great and good coming to these.
Okay, so I can't. I've got to come. Just for me to get an invite, I need to get the attention of this medium, and so I might just buy him give him a diamond bracelet to show how convinced I am of their wonder or something like that. I just can't ring up and make an appointment for 2 o'clock on Sunday.
No, it's very exclusive. Very exclusive.
Okay, and is that what Mrs. Guppy and Florence and all these other ones did?
Yeah, but it was doubly useful for them, because when these women are doing really quite dramatic manifestations, you can control who you have in that circle. So you can have your devotees and your plants, but you can also make sure that no one's, well, you can try and make sure that no one's coming in with the kind of express desire to kind of mess with things or expose you. And Florence Cook in particular, she had a patron. So she had a patron called Charles Blackburn from Manchester, who was a very, very wealthy businessman, and he kind of bankrolled her mediumship under the premise that if he wanted a sitting with her, he could. You know, it was like he had easy access to the most desirable medium in the country.
He was her sponsor. He was her sponsor, or her patron.
He was, absolutely.
So anyway, we were talking. Sorry, I moved away from Florence Cook, because we were following the money there. So bring us back to Florence Cook and her her rivalry with Mrs. Guppy.
Yeah. Sorry, as soon as you mention one thing, it's like, oh, this is interesting.
I'm sure there's plenty of things we can always talk about. But...
Yeah. Florence Cook. She was a manifestation medium, but she was actually trained by Hearn and Williams as well, who were in cahoots with Mrs. Guppy, and these mediums had a spirit guide called John King, who was like a 17th century buccaneer. And John King had, it gets weirder. John King had a daughter, a spirit daughter called Katie King, and Florence got to know Katie King incredibly well, and Katie King became Florence Cook's personal spirit guide. So Florence Cook was a basic medium to start off with, and then she got into cabinet séance, which I'm sure most of us know. It's when like a medium's tied to a chair or restricted, a curtain's pulled around, so if anything that emerges from the cabinet is seen to be sort of semi-spiritually legitimate, because the medium, in theory, can't be running around. So Florence Cook started doing this, and then just manifesting bits of a spirit. So there'd be a foot or like a hand, and then eventually there were faces. And then to top it all, her spirit guide, Katie King, started coming out fully manifested and taking trips around the seance room. Now, Katie King was an absolute runaway success, absolute superstar. And so, because Katie King was a real, tangible, young, beautiful spirit who did look remarkably like Florence Cook in a white dress, but she was this enormous superstar. If you want to see a ghost, if you want proof of the spirit world, if you want to have tea, if you want it with a spirit, if you want a spirit to hold your baby, you can go to see Florence Cook. And she was adored, absolutely adored, and investigated by many people, including a very well-known scientist called William Crookes, who helped develop the X-ray. Yep. And so that's where we get some amazing photographs, again, because of these scientific minds going into seance rooms. And he studied Florence, and with this amazing scientific, rational mind, he deduced that they were two different people, based mainly on very small differences, like a difference in earlobes between the girls. And there's a lot of suggestions that maybe there was more of a relationship between the two of them, but we'll never know. We'll never know with that. But there was one incident in 1873, which is particularly interesting, where Florence was bound, and Katie was doing her rounds of the seance room, and a man by the name of Volkman was there. Now, this man Volkman would actually go on to marry Mrs. Guppy later on. So it's a very tangled web in London at the time. And he was watching the seance, he was watching Katie, and thought, that looks remarkably like Florence. Of course, people at the time were saying, well, Florence is the catalyst for the medium, so of course she'll take on, certain physical similarities. But he thought, well, if she's a ghost, I won't be able to grab her then. So he grabbed Katie King by the waist and refused to let go, proving that Katie wasn't as spiritual as maybe the rest of her devotees have thought. But at the time, she was wrestled out of his arms and put back in the cabinet with the medium. And then a while later, not immediately afterwards, a while later, the curtain was reopened and Florence was found in quite a dishevelled state. But for all of that, the clear exposure that this was Florence in a dress, in her underwear, essentially, didn't ruin her career. And that happened on a few occasions. But the Volkmann exposure as well was there.
If people want to believe, they're going to believe. And as you say, there'll be people tell them stuff. And I suppose in those days, unless you were physically there, you're only going on people's, what he said, she said. It's not like today's when you've got someone instantly tweeting or taking a photo on their camera and doing bits and pieces. It's a lot different. Yeah. Now, the last person that you've said you want to talk about is Helene. I hope I'm saying Helene Smith. You said this person was a French person, I believe, or you said their name is a bit Frenchy.
Yes. Yeah. I think completely forgotten if she's French or Belgian now.
I think you said Belgian. Sorry, Belgian. You said Belgian.
No,
Oh, actually, did you say EBC was Belgium? I don't know. A lot of these people are very exotic in those times, in the Victorian times. So anyway, tell us about Helen Smith then. Let's just make it very common.
Yeah, that was a pseudonym as well that was given to her by a scientist that investigated her called Theodore Flournoy, who quite strangely gave her the pseudonym of the name of his own daughter, which is very odd. It's very odd in itself. I'm sure someone's done some kind of deeply psychological work into that, but yeah.
So anyway, so this person known as Helene Smith, what did she do?
Well, she was known as she's beloved by the Surrealists, and she was kind of known as the muse of automatic writing for a while. And she was a medium who entered trances and would go off a lot of past lives. I think there were 3 different life cycles. There was the Hindu, the royal, where she went into the past life of Marie Antoinette and apparently spoke very convincingly on her. But most interestingly, I think, is this 3rd one, which is the Martian cycle. So Helen was quite unlike most other mediums in that, while everyone else was staying pretty much earthbound, she was off. So she would enter trances and recite these really, really in-depth travels and experiences through space to Mars, and would paint Martian landscapes. She'd describe the landscape, she'd do these amazing paintings, and she would bring back amazing tales of things that are happening in Mars, stories about the landscapes, which when you read bits of them, they do sound quite familiar now. There was one where she said there were carriages with no horses, but they still gave off sparks. Mm-hmm. There were houses with fountains on the roof. There were men and women dressed similarly. So quite normal things like that. And then it all ends up with something like, there are dog-like creatures that walk around 6 feet tall and they make commands, and it all goes a bit skewy. But
you don't know, it hasn't happened yet, doesn't mean it's not going to happen. So just don't get too ahead of yourself.
Yeah, be nice to your dogs. Just wait, they'll turn. They're like Planet of the Apes. But yeah, she most interestingly, I find new languages really interesting. And she entered these trances and would return speaking and writing fluent Martian. So, and this language was shown as like clear proof that there was not only life on another planet, but that this person had immediate contact with this. And yeah, I'm sure you can put one on the screen, but this is some Martian language.
Okay. And did anyone do any sort of research into that, like whether it is like ciphered or something like that?
Yes. sadly. And with most of these otherworldly languages, this one turned out to be a kind of French idiom. So each character would relate to a French letter with French grammatical rules and so forth. But yeah, Helene herself, she had a really great grasp of like Hungarian, English, Spanish, Greek, so she could cobble anything together. But the fact that she did spiritual art, spirit art, and also language, and create this whole world that again just trapped scientists in it that did really, really extensive research. I think it's so interesting.
So there was obviously a little bit, I mean, whether any of this is real or not, but she was obviously producing something that was interesting.
Oh yeah. Even just from a basic artistic perspective, like the work she produced, it's unusual.
Yeah.
It's Martian, and then later in life, it's very, very religious as well. But such interesting characters. It's never just a case of here's a message from the spirit world. It's like here's a message from Mars. Here's a message delivered by an actual ghost. You know, everything was just ramped up. You know, turned up to 11.
It was very much entertainment then. It wasn't just someone sitting there going, you know, with the Ouija board or something, you know, or some table tipping and then talking to the person and that's it, which is what you kind of tend to get today. Why? I mean, I've not really been done that, anything like that, but whereas this is all very extravagant, isn't it? Like, you know, you're talking to Martians, or you've got a person who's running around in the nutty, you know, claiming that there's something else. It does sound like it was good entertainment, and it's something you probably would want to be there just for the sake of being there.
Exactly. It was as much of a spiritual experience as it was just a good day out. You know, it was seen as fun. I mean, if you look at like some of the first trance mediums that came to the UK who like conducted these amazing big talks of thousands of people, the first messages that people were asking for from this person who could supposedly speak to the dead weren't how's my granny, how's my mum, how's my husband, all the rest of it. It was so can you tell us anything about the financial markets? You know, the first people that were speaking out were businessmen. It was seen as nothing's ever really as spooky as we think of it today. I think a lot of kind of that darkness has been added through media, a lot of 70s horrors. We've got a lot to answer for. Not that I don't love them, I truly do. But
I suppose we're used to the sort of the gothic, as you say, you know, that it would be seen silly today if someone was if it was seen as not spooky.
Yeah, because that's what we've come to see as the norm now, isn't it? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think there's a lot of entertainment to be found.
But obviously you have the spirit. I suppose I'm assuming if you speak to someone from a spiritual church, they would not see it as spooky. So it's just where you're looking at these things and how we interpret what people are doing. But it does seem like these people that you've just mentioned are probably not completely 100% kosher.
Not necessarily, no.
No, so that's it. Now, you've got obviously lots and lots of articles and stuff about sort of Victorian spooky stuff. I will say spooky stuff because it is a burials and burialsandbeyond.com. Now, since you launched since we spoke last year, you've actually launched a Patreon page. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's kind of a community extension, let's say, of my website. I call it like a little clubhouse. That's how I word it. But it's a place where there are new posts every week. They're brand new exclusive articles. There's podcasts, there's videos, there's fun stuff. It's all spooky. So there's things about mediumship and ghosts and seance, a lot of stuff on graves, how to read. There's a whole series on how to read a graveyard. So what certain symbols mean. There's other things on controversies in the spirit world, weird graves. You know, there's something for everyone, but it's all very, very accessible and very light-hearted. And it's a really nice little community. Really nice little community. And
you're also always get as much as you can during lockdown, but now more so. You've been you go to quite a lot of cemeteries and go to a lot of things, and people could see things that maybe they can't get to if they're elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I've tried and do as many tours and try and document whatever I do. Wherever I go, if there's a dead thing, if there's a weird thing, I'm there and I want to show it to you. So join my clubhouse and you'll see it all.
Okay. Well, you can find out about that at Burials and Beyond. That's burialsandbeyond.com. I'll put the thing down there and you'll be able to find about the Patreon page and find everything about it. As always, Kate, it's been a year. We've got to make sure that doesn't happen again and that we get you back on the Spooky Owls again and talk about some spooky stuff, and you can just, maybe introduce us some more weirdos from and I'm going to call them weirdos because I think those people you mentioned were not, were
pretty accurate.
Pretty weirdy. All right. Anyway, you have a good one and we'll see you the next time.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.